Increased carbon in the atmosphere warms the planet. Scientists estimate that humans cannot add more than 1 trillion tons, also known as 1,000 gigatons, of carbon to the atmosphere to stay below 2 degrees of global warming. The basic understanding is that beyond 2 degrees of warming, humanity will no longer have the ability to control warming trends, in part due to the release of methane currently trapped beneath the Arctic permafrost. From the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we've spent about 515 gigatons, leaving us with 485 gigatons of carbon left to emit before hitting that 2-degree warming barrier. The first half of our budget was spent over the past 200 years to build the society in which we live today. However, due to a consistently increasingly carbon-intensive world, if current trends continue, the 485 gigatons left in the budget will be spent in as little as the next 30 years. Any use of what is left of our carbon budget that would increase our dependence on fossil fuels is akin to spending your last few dollars to cover the upfront cost of a payday loan. It may make everything look better for the time being, but when collection time rolls around, you've put yourself in a position where you are now at the mercy of external forces. And if you can't pay, Mother Nature just might break your kneecaps. This means we only have 30 years to completely phase out the widespread use of fossil fuels. Therefore, as we move forward, the central policy question must be how we can expedite the decarbonization of our world so as to avoid spending it all.
We know that if we want to avoid catastrophic global warming, we need to reduce emissions. But it can be quite hard to get your head around how to do that. There's this really simple idea.
This stuff has to be kept in the ground. It cannot be dug up.
Because there's only one reason you get it out of the ground, and that is to burn it.
Leave it in the ground.
Keep oil in the soil and the coal in the hole.
That's Bill's simple proposition.
It's the only way forward.
You actually can't use the majority of the reserves that have been identified by fossil fuel companies.
So this idea of keeping it in the ground comes from Bill McKibben. And there are really 3 numbers that you need to know.
3 facts.
First is 2 degrees.
2 degrees.
2 degrees.
That is the threshold for dangerous climate change. The second number
565
is 565 gigatons.
gigatons.
Now that's the amount of carbon dioxide that we can safely release into the atmosphere and still have a reasonable chance of staying below 2 degrees. That is kind of a carbon budget.
When you start getting beyond that,
things start getting really bad. And the third number, and this is kind of the scary number, is
2795 gigatons.
Now that's the amount of carbon dioxide that would be released if all of the fossil fuel reserves that we know about already were dug up and burned. You will have noticed that 2,795 is a lot bigger than 565.
We have way more fossil fuel in the reserves than we could possibly burn.
if they were to burn those reserves, never mind ones they haven't yet explored, just the ones they've already identified, you would end up emitting so much carbon that you would produce catastrophic climate change.
Astonishingly.
Companies are still looking for more. And in fact, last year, I think they spent over 700 billion looking for more.
So there's a real tension there.
And while you are trying to persuade people to change their light bulbs and to drive less often or whatever it might be, if this stuff is still being pumped out of the ground, all those rather feeble measures are going to prove to be useless.
Were we to burn
We can't actually
all
burn.
the fossil fuels which are there, it would lead to inevitable disaster. There's not a question of it. I mean, it's just
We should be tackling the fossil fuel companies directly. Leave it
In the
on
ground.
the ground.
This stuff has to be kept in the ground. It cannot be dug up.
It's the only way forward.
Okay, the 2 things kind of left out of those slightly older videos was what I said earlier. The current science says that it's kind of like an insurance question. How much risk are you willing to take on? Well, the current science is things start to get risky about 1.5 degrees, which currently it looks like we're going to pass before 2030. So less than 6 years from today. And the second thing that video didn't talk about is that business as usual projections say we're probably headed for 4 to 5 degrees centigrade of warming by 2100. So your kids and your grandkids are going to be dealing with a very different world unless we get off our butts and take action. And, you know, what would have been great is if in 1980, I mean, because we've known about this for 100 years, if we had taken action much earlier when the scientists were first talking about this, it would be a nice glide path. But because we've continued to do things the old way, it is now getting to the point where it gets really, really hard to do the things that we would need to do to actually stay below 1.5 degrees. So this is where I come in and say, the low-cost path to actually getting this done is simply to never buy another fossil fuel device. I'm not saying you need to throw away the car you're driving or the gas water heater or the gas furnace that you currently have and bought 2 years ago. I'm just saying never ever buy another one. Heat pumps use 1/3 as much energy as a legacy gas or resistant electric device. Electric cars use something like 1/5 to 1/10 as much energy to accomplish the same thing. Again, I got some slides later on of my lifestyle, what I've done, that kind of illustrate that. But one big issue is that human beings have a real tendency to look at first cost instead of lifetime cost. One thing that's true of everything I'm advocating here is the device might cost 10% more upfront, but then uses 1/3 as much energy during its life. So in its lifetime, it is significantly less expensive, but you have to be thinking about it in terms of its lifetime cost, not just the first cost. Big example is when people replace their ACs and furnaces. I see people all the time get 3 quotes and take the low bidder. Well, guess what? In the HVAC industry, the low bidder is probably going to be a pretty poor installation. If you want a high quality, efficient system, it's going to cost a little bit more upfront and then save you big bucks over the next 20 years. Go ahead.
Call them inverters.
Yep. Okay. All right, so most talks about energy efficiency start with the fact that efficiency projects typically have a 15 to 30% return on investment. Solar project is maybe 8 to 10%. So they want you to start with changing your light bulbs. Well, I'm here to tell you that I hope you did that a long time ago, but there are 4 things that you can do that will have a very large impact if you just do these 4 things. And yes, should you do the 50 little things? I mean, I cut the energy consumption of my house in half by doing weekend energy efficiency projects. They were 50 little things, caulking, weather stripping, air sealing, all this kind of stuff. It took me years and lots of time and thought to have that 50% impact. I then got rid of the other 50% simply by electrifying my house and my car, powering it with solar. So let's kind of talk about those. And this slide is to remind us of the 50 small things that all add up. You know, an example would be at one point I had an audio amplifier that I left on all the time so I could play music from my computer. And after I did other projects, it turned out this amplifier was using 10% of my whole house energy consumption. So I have an energy monitoring system so I can see how much energy is being used by every breaker in my house. And once I saw that, I moved the plug 2 inches to the switched plug and I only turned it on when I used it, and I saved 10% of my consumption right then. Now, I had already reduced my consumption from 30 kilowatt hours a day to 10 kilowatt hours a day. But at that point, that one amplifier was 10% of my energy consumption. So, yeah, there's a lot of things you can do, but don't not do the four big things because you're focused on, you know, that incandescent light bulb in the closet. All right, first big thing, heat pump water heaters. This is an electric water heater, but uses 1/3 as much energy as a legacy gas or resistant electric water heater. It's got a little compressor up on top, kind of sounds like a window air conditioner, quieter. So you wouldn't necessarily want it right next to your bedroom. I've got mine in my storeroom. You get some free cooling because the cool goes into the room and the heat goes into the water. And something really nice is this only uses 400 watts. So it's really friendly with my home battery system and my solars and all that kind of stuff. These cost a bit more. I think they're about $1,500 at Home Depot and Lowe's. I actually like the Rheem they've got at Home Depot because it has the Wi-Fi stuff built right in. You can sit and control it from your phone. One problem is that most plumbers are completely unfamiliar, and when you ask for a quote, they gouge you terribly because they just don't know that it's no more difficult to install than regular electric water heater. And so, you know, if I were getting a plumbing quote, I would say, I want a new electric water heater. How much do you charge to install it? $400, $500. Okay, oh, and by the way, it's a heat pump. Don't let them gouge you. I had one plumber quote $4,000 for a project that actually cost $2,500 to do. And you know, that, go ahead.
Does it, if you have a gas system and you want to go electric, does that add to the cost?
Yes, it does. And there are some significant Inflation Reduction Act tax credits for that. So, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second here, about some electrical retrofits you should be doing now so that you're not scrambling to do it when your water heater starts leaking. I'll talk about that in a moment. All right, second thing, heat pump, space heating and cooling. A heat pump is just an air conditioner with a reversing valve, so it can heat as well as cool. How many people here have heat pumps today? Okay, how many people have gas furnaces? Okay, so those of you with gas furnaces, I'm recommending that you never ever buy another gas furnace. We have a perfect climate for heat pumps. In fact, Maine is a perfect climate for heat pumps. They have low temperature versions that work fine to 20 below. So don't let anybody tell you these don't work fabulously in Arizona. Anybody have a gas stove? Okay, so this isn't really an energy issue because, you know, it doesn't use all that much. It is a health issue. Recent studies have shown major health impacts from the leaks and the combustion products coming off gas stoves. When I do energy audits, I see unventilated gas stoves without an exhaust hood all the time. And so, especially if any of you who have gas stoves have asthma issues, get rid of that gas stove. It is really bad for your health. Let's see, there was a study, children living in a home with gas cooking stove have a 42% increased risk of asthma. So once you go inductive, you know, you realize how much better that is just for cooking. Faster responding, water boils quicker, doesn't pollute the air in nearly the same way that a gas stove does. Now you can buy fancy built-in models like that, and when Arizona implements the portion of the Inflation Reduction Act, supposed to be fourth quarter, you'll be able to get a $1,000 rebate at the store on an inductive cooktop. Now if you just want to try it out, this is what I'm doing right now. For like $70, I have a little countertop model, and I do 95% of my cooking on it. Just works great. And I even take it camping, because I have an electric car. I often go camping at places that have RV pedestals, so I can charge the car overnight. So I've got electricity, so I actually take this camping with me and cook on a camping. I have a zero combustion camping trip, except for the s'mores. Okay, so if you want to try it out, really inexpensive to just give it a try. See how you like it. All right, electric cars. I've been driving all electric since 2015, and I got to warn you about something. If you test drive one of these, it's going to ruin you for other cars because they're so much fun. And you know, they're just very quick to enter a freeway, to merge in traffic. We talked about camping. I can go camping because I have a Tesla, so I can sleep in the back. I have a 3-inch foam pad. Yeah. Elon's a jerk, but the company makes great cars. Okay. Total jerk, makes great cars and rockets, you know. But because it's an electric car, I can leave the heat or the AC on all night and camp, you know, very comfortably, even in the middle of summer or winter. In fact, last Christmas, I was up on the New Mexico-Colorado border at Navajo Lake, I think it's called. Beautiful scenery. The moon was rising over the lake. It was 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and I was just as comfortable as I could be because I could leave the heat on all night. You can't do that on a fossil car. So I divide electric cars into 3 categories. City cars are those cars with a range of less than 150 miles. State cars with range of more than 150 miles. And then Teslas. Okay? There's something that's true today that is not going to be true in 2025. So let's see, I think I've got it right here. So today, no, first of all, let me say that you do 95% of your charging at home in your own carport or garage. Now, is there anybody here that lives in multifamily or anything like that that does not have their own off-street parking or carport or garage? Okay, that's a problem. Call me up, let's go visit your management. Let's start pestering them today to provide the car charging capabilities at those multifamily. Multifamily is a real roadblock today just because you don't have a place to plug in at home. And that is so much more convenient and cheaper than any of the other options. People ask me, how long does it take to charge your car? I say 10 seconds. I plug it in as I walk in the house. When I come out, my car's all charged up. Okay, so in the fast charging that you use pretty much only on trips, today there are 3 different standards. Think VHS and Betamax. There's CHAdeMO, which is pretty much only used by Nissan, and even they are abandoning it. There's CCS, which all car companies except for Tesla have been using up until now. And then there's NACS, North American Charging Standard, which up till now has been the Tesla supercharger standard. Now, in this last year, nearly all car manufacturers have said they're switching to the NACS connector because Tesla has built out an international charging network that the others can't even touch. Volkswagen was forced to spend a couple $2 billion on charging network because they were cheating on the diesel emissions, and they did a really bad job. There's been significant reliability issues with some of their chargers. So one of the things that happened, I think it was the head of GM did a cross-country trip in one of their electric vehicles using the CCS chargers and saw how much trouble he had. And he went back to his office and said, we're switching to NACS. And within a couple of months of that, almost all manufacturers have said, we're switching to NACS. We're going to have the supercharger compatibility. So pretty much, or almost all cars in 2025, and probably everything by 2026, you'll be able to buy a new car from any manufacturer that will have that NACS port that makes doing trips easy. In February, I drove my Tesla from Tucson to Cancun, Mexico, and back, 5,500 miles for my nephew's destination wedding. Piece of cake, couldn't have been easier. But today I could only do that trip in a Tesla. So, yeah, Elon Musk is a jerk.
Do you have the random fart sounds in your seats?
I do. And I actually have a side business called Turo, T-U-R-O, where I rent out electric cars to just people wanting to rent a car. It's kind of like Airbnb for cars. And I only do electric cars. And anybody with kids, I absolutely show them how to use the fart mode because the kids just love it.
They do.
Okay, any questions about charging?
So did you have to plot out like every charging station so that you knew you could get to?
No, there's an app called a Better Route Planner. So for all trips except for that one, I could just put my destination in the car and the car figures it out. But actually for this trip, this 3,000 mile trip to Mexico, I had to use a different app called a Better Route Planner. It found all the charges for me, told me how long I needed to stay there, all that kind of stuff. I just followed the plan. It took me like 2 minutes.
And how long then, when you go to charge while you're en route, does it typically take?
Typically about 30 minutes. The joke that I tell is the biggest dilemma that you're going to face on a long trip in a Tesla is that it's true that you are forced to choose between pie, cobbler, cake, and ice cream. You got enough time to use the restroom and have a piece of pie. Go ahead.
We have a friend with a Tesla, big fan of it, and he is, and we went on a scenic route between here and Colorado, and he said, I couldn't do that with my Tesla. There's no place to charge if I go down.
I do it constantly. Now, my rule of thumb has been every time I encountered an outlet that I didn't have an adapter for and could charge faster than whatever adapters I did, I went out and bought that adapter. So I've got like 6 different adapters so I can plug into anything I've ever encountered. And another one of my tricks is I like to get off the freeways. Most of the superchargers are actually on freeways. I like to get off onto the state highways and the boonies and go visit the state parks, national parks, county parks, all that kind of stuff. So I am saying you can go any place a gas car can go. I'm not saying you'd necessarily do it in the same way. An example being, now that I claim to be semi-retired, I no longer want to drive 900 miles a day. I have done it in a Tesla from my house to my sister's house. I don't need to do that anymore, so I try to take my vacations and drive no more than about 300 miles a day. So my typical vacation style is simply to have lunch at a supercharger. So I leave in the morning fully charged, I have lunch at a supercharger, and I spend the night at a state, national, or county park that has an RV pedestal, and I plug in and charge up overnight on that RV pedestal. That's those RV pedestals. There's apparently old people like RVs, and there's a lot of them out there. And so when you go to the rural areas, the greatest resource, even today, is those RV pedestals at parks, because I can charge up that time. And I personally just prefer that mountain, forest, or lake view to some hotel that doesn't give me a view. So that's my style of doing it. I go anywhere and everywhere without any difficulty at all by having an adapter, having 6 or 7 different kinds of adapters, and just going to the parks and stuff, because every place an RV goes, I can charge my car. Does that make sense? Guys, you guys are great.
So when you plug your car in to charge it for the electricity, what is the source of that electricity, and is that a source of pollution?
So when I do it at my home, it's solar. So when I do it in a national park, it's whatever the source of that electricity is there. So even if the electricity is generated by a coal plant, an electric car is still going to pollute less than a gas car. So don't let, that's a piece of disinformation that gets spread. So as the grid gets cleaner, the car gets cleaner.
So I'm advocating you get an electric car and solar and charge the car off of solar. My front license plate says solar powered. And I just wish we could persuade TEP to move a little faster. Good.
Are people able to totally go off the grid and have batteries so that the electric company's not essentially making a profit off your solar panels?
Let me answer you this way. I export enough solar power to pay the service charge for my grid connection. And the grid connection is really cheap backup to the batteries that I have. So I don't advocate going off grid unless they keep jacking up the service charge more and more, which they're trying to do. But if you don't have that backup grid connection, then you have to put a lot more solar and batteries in to give you those days of autonomy. So the far cheaper way to do it is stay grid connected, have the battery system, so I almost never ever actually buy any electricity from TEP. I'm only sending it to my neighbors. And TEP is paying me 9.6 cents a kilowatt hour for it, which basically pays my service charge. My tagline for my energy efficiency business is, if you add up what you're spending a year on electricity, fossil gas, and gasoline, and it's more than zero, you're paying too much. So I literally have near zero energy bills. I'm saving about $3,500 a year by doing what I've done. How are we doing on time?
Probably.
Okay, a little long. All right, hold your question for a little bit. Let me get through a few more slides here. Hopefully answer some of these questions, and then you can tell me how much time we have at the end. Okay, getting ready for this. A couple of things that you should do right now to get ready. One is to put in a NEMA 1450. This is the same outlet that a RV uses or an electric stove. This 240 volt outlet. Put one of these in where you park your car. This is really all you need to be able to charge your car, because the next thing you should get is a portable charging cable if it doesn't come with a car that can plug into this. So mine cost me about $50 to install this and set it up because my carport is right next to my electrical panel. I did this for a friend that was on the opposite side of the house, and I think it was about $400 to install it. Go ahead.
All right, if you're putting on a new roof, the cost of the solar panels and so forth, how long does it take you to recoup the cost of installation?
Let me answer that in just a little bit. The short version is the project should be cash flow positive, so you're going to have more money than you had before the very next month. And I'll get to that because I know that's an important question. If it starts leaking and you're scrambling to replace it, you've already got the power to that closet. Okay. Let me talk a little bit about solar. Everything that I'm talking about here, with the exception of home batteries, if you do it right, you can do it cash flow positive. So instead of sending the $2,000 or $3,000 a year most people send to the utilities, I got a home equity credit line from Pima Federal Credit Union. I used that to buy my first electric car and my solar. I then paid it off with my $3,500 a year savings. So it doesn't matter how long you're going to be in the house. That's a question I get a lot. You get a 30% federal tax credit, so if you pay taxes, it's only going to cost you 70% of whatever the contractor gets paid. And I'm not saying it's going to increase the resale value of the house by 100% of what you paid the contractor. I am saying it's going to increase the resale value by more than 70%. So if I were going to sell a house 2 months from now, I would put solar on it next month and make money off the tax credit. So, like I said, if you do this correctly, it should be all cash flow positive, so you're paying for the improvements with what you were previously sending the utilities. All right, so this is hopefully someday we'll have solar on every building. Neighborhoods will look like this.
Utilities will look like this: wind, solar, storage, maybe some geothermal thrown in there. People ask me about nuclear. Nuclear is way more expensive than wind and solar with storage. And the small nuclear reactors that people talk about are even more expensive. The most recent nuke plant that went online was $20 billion and took 20 years to build. Sorry, we don't have 20 years to do this stuff. And they still haven't solved the toxic waste problem. So I'm not advocating we should shut down the ones we have. Let's let them run for their 80-year lifetime. But let's not build any more of them. It's economically ridiculous. The utility that built that Vogel plant had to raise rates enormously to pay for it, and their customers are just up in arms. Okay, this is what I hope a future garage looks like: electric car and a home battery. And I can talk more about the advantages of having a home battery later if there's time. Talk about toxic waste problems. Wind spill is a nice breeze. A solar spill is called a nice day. We had a lot of solar spills today. All right, let me talk about my personal experience of doing this to my house. This chart here is my energy consumption. The brown is gasoline, the gray is fossil gas, the black is fossil electricity from TEP. So the decline you see is those 50 energy efficiency projects that I talked about. And the process of electrification, that when you switch from electric resistance or gas to heat pumps, you get that 1/3 less, you use as 1/3 to 1/4 as much energy as that legacy device. So I'm now using approximately 20% as much energy as I did when I started, in a more comfortable, healthier lifestyle that's way less expensive. All right, here's my energy cost. When I started out, I was spending almost $3,500 a year on energy. Now, basically, my only cost is the service charges on water and electricity. And most of those are paid with my exports. So literally, my annual energy costs today are near zero. And this is my carbon emissions, gone from 4,300 pounds a year to my carbon emissions are now negative, have been for several years. Okay, how much time do we, if any, do we have for questions?
We got 2 or 3 more questions, and I think we might have to wrap it up today.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Go ahead.
Your electric vehicle, when you go to plug it in, can you plug it into just a regular everyday outlet in your garage?
You can. Let me answer this real quickly. In the terminology that we use, any ordinary 120 volt outlet, we call that level 1. That's good for a place that you're at 10 or 12 hours, like all day at work, all night at home. You can add 40, 50 miles of range while you sleep. But that's only about 5 miles of range per hour of charging, so it's super slow. A 240 volt outlet, you can add about 25 miles of range per hour of charging, so that's what you really want to have at home. And then on the highway, you can go from 20% to 90% in 30 minutes typically. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay. Somebody in the back, over there.
So, I mean, an electric car, and is there an advantage to wait until next year for us eventually? Could you repeat that?
Are there any advantages to waiting to next year? Yes, if you don't want to buy a Tesla. I would only ever buy a car with an max port. Now, GM and Ford and Rivian are giving out adapters right now. I don't know if I want to mess with an adapter for the next 10 years. So I would be inclined to only buy a car that has a NACS port in it. I'm sorry?
How do you say?
NACS, the North American Charging Standard. Today, the only new car that you can get with a NACS port in it is a Tesla. In 2025, it'll be almost everybody. Okay, somebody else.
One more.
What about battery degradation rather? How long have you had your Tesla and what's its battery status?
Excellent question. Do not buy a Nissan Leaf in a hot climate. Okay. Nissan is the only car manufacturer that doesn't temperature manage their batteries. Lithium batteries like to be at room temperature. With Tesla batteries, they're expected to last 400,000 miles. Nissan Leaf was designed for cool climates. They never expected that they would sell in hot climates, and Nissan Leaf's batteries degrade significantly. I drove one for 5 years. It was a great car, but the battery declined significantly. I've had no noticeable decline in my Teslas. So as long as you buy anything other than a Nissan Leaf, you should get an extra, at least the lifetime of the car. Can we take one more?
Sure.
We have an enthusiastic crowd here. You had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, when I look at solar estimates, batteries can be a real big question and expense. Can you help us?
Okay, I'll try to make this short. I bought a battery for my house. I really like it. I think it was totally worth it. It is not cash flow positive. It's the one project I did that was not cash flow positive because I don't know how to calculate the return on investment for resiliency. I really like the fact that if the grid goes down, the margaritas will be at my house.
What's your
Okay.
growth?
And let's remember that because of a big thunderstorm kind of at the beginning of this year, there were neighborhoods in Tucson that didn't have power for a week. Okay, so it can happen here. I mean, there's people, in Louisiana and stuff right now that are maybe no power for months. When I first got my battery, I switched my main breaker off and I lived off grid for a week just to see what it was like. Couldn't tell the difference. So, yes, I advocate getting a home battery system, but you've got to do it for one of two reasons. You want the resiliency, or you want the bragging rights. That's how I got to the zero emissions, because I charge my battery up in the morning, and I run the house off of solar all day, and then I run the house off of the battery all night. So I've had months where I imported all of about 6 kilowatt hours during the entire month from TEP. And that was really just the rounding error on the circuitry. Okay, well, thank you very much. I hope that you will walk out of here knowing something you didn't know walking in.
You work hard.
Sorry?